Britain's looking pretty mid these days, isn't it? It's pretty difficult. It's unimpressive. The decline is palpable. You walk around, there's litter everywhere. The trains aren't running as expected. Everything's really expensive. There's people that don't even speak the language walking the streets and disrespecting its great buildings and culture and taking from its economic system.
Can I show my age?
Yep, go for it.
What does mid mean?
So, online discourse at the moment, there is the idea that you are sort of middle of the pack, average, and it's almost more insulting than being called unattractive. You're just so unremarkable that I don't even think about you.
Right.
And that's what's happened to Britain. They keep saying, oh, Britain's not declining, it's great, its days are ahead. Does anyone really believe that?
No.
It feels like we are in managed decline as a regional constituency of a global project. It feels like they've appointed some car phone warehouse manager, our respective prime minister, and there's a revolving door of those managerial types who will just steward us into irrelevance when we could be a hell of a lot better. Yeah. There's just no political will to do so. And this segment was actually inspired by my recent visit to America. So this was last month, and I went over to Cambridge, Massachusetts for about a week, went to Harvard, and then I also ended up going to Washington. And I was just looking through this, and in America, and this is the thread of just a various set of images. This particular area in Cambridge, I was just walking around all of the suburbs, and it felt like I was being in a bit of a Stephen King film. But most of the lawns were taken care of. Yeah, there were some cringe lawn signs and BLM and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, there was some chalk drawings saying that all Republicans are fascists, and it's unbearable.
I interrupt this segment to bring you an important message about this stuff, the dollar. Not going so well, is it? Inflation is out of control and debt is even more out of control. In fact, the US government is on the verge of spending $1 trillion a year just servicing its debt. It spends about $6.6 trillion and it only collects about $4.6 trillion in revenues. So you can see that this situation is rapidly taking a turn for the worse. You might want to consider some gold and silver. And that is why that we've done a partnership deal with Goldco, and we've created lotuseatersgold.com. Go and check that out. It's an offer for our American viewers. You can transfer a proportion of your IRA into this, and if you do so, you're going to get some of this lovely stuff, some bonus silver thrown in on top, up to $10,000. Or you can even take delivery of the physical gold to your home address if you prefer. So if you want money that goes clang when you put it down, check out lotuseatersgold.com.
But there is a palpable sense in the air of self-belief. There is a spirit still alive in America. They still fly their national flag at a roughly 2-to-1 ratio to the pride flag. There is a much more healthy mood going on in America, and it looks like a revival might actually be possible in certain pockets of it there, like some of the outside DC areas of West Virginia where there's some like young Catholics and young Republicans and that living. There's still a sense of self-belief, whereas if you walk around England these days, people are stooped, they're demoralized, they're depressed, and they don't actually believe in their ability to rescue themselves, because every time they try and assert that their culture is better than is being denigrated, they're kicked down and called racist. And something that I noticed, but I didn't think I photographed it here, is the idea of honesty boxes. Now, this is something that I saw Callum feature in his video touring Britannia, of where you had an honesty box for filling up a bottle full of milk at a vending machine in rural Britain. There were honesty boxes here when I was walking around Massachusetts for books. So people could just walk up, open the cage, take a book, leave a book, and so people could read as they please. And this coincided with a recent piece from my friend Mary over at Unheard, where she was talking about the death of the honesty box due to mass migration. Cultural disintegration is happening because of the amount of people brought into the country that aren't willing to assimilate, because they're treating Britain like an economic zone. I don't know if you saw the recent discourse on Twitter. I think I've got a link embedded here at some point about this. But recently, these adverts have been appearing on the London Underground that have said, immigrant, I'm a migrant and I'm making a difference, and so I'm working hard to then send money back home. It's like, oh, okay, right. So you have no ties to this place. You see it as a economic opportunity zone ripe for extraction, and you can just send it to your family overseas. And I understand why people are doing that if they're allowed to do it, but why are our politicians letting them do it? Letting people come over, having no consideration for the continuity of the culture, just to plunder the place, and as if the culture wasn't the prerequisite to us being very prosperous in the first place. You need that work ethic. You need that galvanizing spirit. You need the ability to have high trust so people just don't take.
I wrote an article on this a couple of years ago. I think it's in my second book, The Making of a Beggar. And in that year I wrote the book, I think like 2 years ago, the UN stated that in the UK, we sent abroad £8 billion. So immigrants working here, sending money abroad to their family, we lose $8 billion a year.
Yeah, and that's as well, lots of them, their first year coming over here, where they will use public services without ever paying into the service.
Yeah.
So they're sending out $1 billion abroad, but they're subtracting probably equal or more than that as well. So running up a massive deficit. And so I just wanted to read something that Mary wrote in here. A fluctuating community, by contrast, with a large proportion of individuals who don't or don't yet have long-standing ties to the area and one another, is unlikely to be one in which people leave their doors unlocked or sell raspberries via an honesty box. Many who recall growing up in more stable communities dislike the sense of lower social cohesion that research shows accompanies rapid social turnover since about, 1997. From this perspective, it may be tempting to ask, who is the our in diversity is our strength? But to the extent that population turnover is driven by immigration, expressing disquiet is to court moral untouchability. So you can't actually question if the mass migration policies are in the interests of the native indigenous British community, who actually have an entitlement to say, no, I was born here, my family were born here, I was raised here, I love this place, and if you make this home like any other, I have nowhere else to go to. At least all these people that you've brought over have a homeland to send money back to and go back to if Britain falls apart. If Britain falls, where else do I go? I just become another refugee of the global homogenous project, and it's very alienating. So I wanted to compare us a little bit to the US, because there was this good Telegraph article recently. And it says, hardworking US is getting rich while the UK struggles on benefits. And there's just some interesting stats in here. So they're middle of the pack for earnings in G7 countries. So we have some graphs in this actual article. America takes the top spot, of course. I think this is down a little bit. It says a nurse in America can expect a pay packet of $85,000 compared to $48,500 for a nurse working in the UK. Back in 2000, GDP per capita was higher than 14 US states in the UK, and similar to that of Ohio or South Carolina, because America is a continent, not a country, hence it's so hard to govern. Two decades later, the UK has dropped 11 positions to have a GDP per capita that's closer to Arkansas, which is one of the least populated states, and it's very agrarian. It's not exactly a very built-up city place, whereas the UK is one of the financial centres of the world, thanks to London, and also because of that, leaves behind lots of other towns that keep being promised levelling up funds and instead get HS2, which shaves 11 minutes off your train journey straight into London. Yay, more centralisation. If these trends continue, by 2035, the gap between output per person in the US and EU will be as large as that between Japan and Ecuador. So we've also got a sizable economically inactive population. So that's the retired people, that's students, and people receiving benefits. So that's 15 million people, which is a record, receiving universal credit. Now, just to put in perspective how much our political class hate us, I went to National Conservative Conference, May now, and most of the conversation around there was about how liberal materialistic capitalism has failed people because they've outsourced jobs overseas, regardless of the cultural impacts, regardless of the impact on communities that former mining towns, for example. And then the cabinet ministers get up. And Suella Braverman says that British values are tolerance, liberty, and a universal sense of human dignity. So nothing particular.
Meaningless.
Exactly, buzzwords. And Michael Gove gets up and he's asked, what are the achievements of 13 years of Conservative government? And he not only says the intellectual and superficial diversity of our cabinet, so more brown people, Great, thanks, Michael. He said the streamlining of the universal credit system. Right, so the Conservatives expanded the welfare state, and now we have more dependents than ever, and you're racking that up as a win. Are you, Michael? I can only explain his continued failure upwards in government by he must know where a body is buried somewhere. Because otherwise, it's completely inexplicable why the man gets everything wrong from the education system to housing to espousing the kinds of policies that would be better in the Liberal Democrats, even though he actually said on stage there's not a single Conservative MP that would be more at home in the Liberal Democrats. I can't explain why he keeps progressing other than the party themselves actively want to destroy the country at this point, bar a few backbenchers, which are all right. So this is actually least pronounced among 25 to 49-year-olds, this economic inactivity zone. But then that just shows that we're squeezing the middle class to death. It shows that the most entrepreneurial, the exact people that should be at the age at which they're settling down and having families, are becoming tax cattle for the least likely people to work. And yes, I understand that people on a state pension feel that they've worked all their lives and they've paid into the system. But that is also a sense of entitlement that is a consequence of not understanding how economics works, because inflation has robbed us of our purchasing power. And so lots of the boomers, and I count my grandparents among this, both set of who are still alive and who I love and I see pretty much every week, they don't understand that they paid in a lot less than they're currently taking out, just because the government has squandered lots of money away on things like COVID and that. And so currently, actually, your pension is being paid for by me. So I can't get a house, mainly because of mass migration. I am earning less, and I'm taxed at the highest tax burden since the Second World War because of the way the government has mismanaged the economy and because you need a pension. And so the system isn't helping anyone, but you're also not allowed to question any kind of restructure to the NHS or the pension system because you'll be called a bigot or something, which is Mary's point, and it's just very, very annoying. Quote from this article. Of course, there are pros and cons of living on either side of the pond, as one person recently commented on the internet forum Reddit. Oversimplified, but on a scale of 1 to 10, life in America is a 1 if you're poor and a 10 if you're rich, they observed. In England, it's a 4 to a 6 no matter what, and I'll take the security of that. But, as we're learning, there's little security in mediocrity. And that's why I'm calling Britain mid, because at the moment, no matter how hard you try, tall poppy syndrome kicks in because of the egalitarian approach of redistributive tax systems. And so anyone who is enterprising might just move abroad to somewhere like Ireland or the US or Australia, where they're going to be taxed less and have less of an economic skill ceiling over their head, and where the climate might not be as stifling to question, well, should we be a health system with a country attached that isn't actually meeting any of its targets, and the majority of people are in zones where the ambulance won't reach them in the stated time that they're expected to, so they might just die awaiting getting to hospital. Like, for some reason, none of these services that we keep paying more and more for seem to be helping anyone. Pretty frustrating, but
and none of them are getting any better.
No,
money isn't the solution to any of these services we have. Could we just keep plowing more and more money into it? What we're running now in our country basically is a Ponzi scheme.
Yes,
we're going to keep taking more and more and more of the people who are earning money, which then makes some of those drop out of earning to go on benefit or leave the country, which means now we've got to take slightly more of the people that exist to make up the shortfall that people have left, people on benefit. It's a bit like what's happening to California. Anyone with any money now in California seems to be moving out, and they keep increasing the taxes, which forces more people to move out, and the state is going to go bankrupt. Well, the UK is a Ponzi scheme. It can't go on like this. When change will happen, I've got no idea. What it will take to make that change, I've no idea.
Well, also, there is the perverse incentive for the government to keep doing this, because then they foster learned helplessness and dependency among a large swath of the population that will keep voting for the party that promises them more money, because otherwise they have no means of eating. Because they have learned that to work is actually a liability, because you're going to actually earn more and have a higher quality of life if you just accept a government handout. Problem is, of course, when the government stops extending that hand because you tweet the wrong thing, then you are just going to starve. So pretty dire. But anyway, then we look at the people that are actually having these handouts. It turns out that the record number of Britons are receiving more in benefits than they pay in tax. Yeah. So this is Civitas for the Office of National Statistics. So, far-right organisation. And this is the data from 2020 to 2021. So this was before the record number of migration reached almost, it's going to be 1 million this year, I think. Great. They showed a record number of 54.2% of people, so that's 36 million, now live in households which receive more in benefits than they contributed in taxes. This includes non-cash benefits such as the NHS and education. The study also showed 83% of all income tax is paid by 40% of British adults. So that's that squeezed middle and upper private class that we were talking about that have the incentive to move overseas because they're mistreated. Authors Tim Kinnox and Daniel Liley say the net dependency ratio is the highest ever on record. And so that's why you get articles like this that says, the once great British middle class is now riddled with entitlement and dependency. So what they say is, last year, the top fifth of earners paid an average of 33,579 more in taxes than they received in benefits and contributed half, 49.4% of all tax collected by the government. The top 10% pay a third of all tax. For income tax, the contribution of the well-off is even more startling. The top fifth of earners now pay 2/3, 67.7% of all the government's income tax receipts. Now, you would actually have a larger, more industrious middle class that you wouldn't be able to accuse of entitlement if you stopped squeezing them out of existence and making it so that other destinations were more prosperous and more attractive. But instead, they're just chasing all the British prosperity away and packing all of the hotels full of people who don't work, but that government spending increasingly going up can look like more economic activity on a GDP graph because they count government spending and just money changing hands in their graphs. They can fudge the numbers to look like, hey, we're doing a good job. because they've just determined the best thing about a country is being a growth zone. And if they can't create more growth, then they'll just artificially create more people in the country. Good fun. Anyway, so on to the next one. There are adverts all over the tube, as I mentioned. So this is Paul Embry from GB News, who's actually left-wing, and he can diagnose problems, but he can't diagnose solutions. And he said, spotted this on the tube. Even if I were pro-open borders, I'd be uneasy about that strapline. It basically presents the UK as little more than a cash cow to be milked by the international labour force. No notion of home, community, or belonging. Yes, because you can't qualify sentiment on a spreadsheet, so it's utterly useless to our managerial class. And Albie, who's interpersonally a nice fella, but wrong about everything, he says, anyone else think this is a touch of snowflakery from Paul Embry? If an immigrant wants to spend their money supporting a family abroad, it's their choice. It's up to individuals to decide how to spend their money. Family and individual choice are conservative values. Let's break down exactly how this is wrong. First of all, cultural apathy does not create a country. A country is a piece, a people, a place, a time, a culture, and a set of traditions that they have inherited, inculcated, and iterate upon. And those traditions have come out of that people, place, and time. It is specific. It's not just this universal thing that you can package up and transplant elsewhere and think that as soon as people come over and they're just generating money, that they are as good as the people that have grown up here and been inculcated in that culture for decades. Also, it's not just a choice, because choices are not made in vacuums. And other countries do not consider themselves as universal as Albie or our ruling class does, because they consider themselves bearers of civilization and they have ethnic in-group bias. So they don't feel connected to this place. They see this place as an extraction zone from which they can take all that is worth, and as soon as conditions get bad, they can hop on a plane and go back home. Whereas lots of people, like me, don't want to, because we grew up here, and so I feel entitled to live here, and actually wouldn't feel at home anywhere else. So we're not just anywhere men. And the last one, family and individual choice are conservative values. Whose family? Which choices? No, you're talking about liberal values, and you're conflating liberal with conservative, because the capital C conservatives are progressives, and they have been for quite a while. And Albie, yes, you are a progressive. You don't want to admit it, but you are, because you don't understand your own philosophy. Family, it depends on the family structure. It depends on the quality of family. It depends on if the family contributes to the continuation of the nation, or they don't care about the country and they would belong elsewhere. And the individual choice, well, is the individual choice virtuous? Or is it just making you another stratified, fungible consumer unit that the government can register in your one-bedroom apartment, endlessly consuming and cooming, so that it looks like the line will go up, while also the other line that goes up are deaths of despair and demographic decline is kicking into effect because fewer people are having families, but they're just sitting on Netflix all day. But none of these things are conservative. None of them are a strong moral narrative to impart onto people.
Albie's a good example of what's wrong with the Tory party, because he's not a Tory. He thinks he is, and the party are full of people like him now. Hence why we've had 13 years of what we've had. The UK, I wrote an article about this called, I think it was called Hotel UK. The UK now, our home now is basically a hotel. How do you treat a hotel? You don't treat it like a home, because it's not a home. You use it, you treat the services at the hotel, you chip the wardrobe, you don't tidy up after yourself. What's the point? It's just a hotel.
Yeah, you always think someone else is going to clean up after you.
Because and then when that hotel isn't good enough for you, what do? You go find another hotel. If the UK started, it is declining. If the UK had a horrendous event and suddenly we became like a third world country, the exodus from the UK by all the immigrants and people who were born here will be massive. They will just find a new hotel somewhere else. And all we're doing is destroying the country, because there is no community. And that's what we need to understand, that this mass migration, this understanding and this feeling that anyone's welcome here, and the fact we're earning some money and GDP's going up isn't the gold. It's not the gold at the end of the rainbow. It's self-harm. I'd rather be poorer and happier than being a millionaire and being miserable.
This is something that my grandparents have always said to me, and they grew up in the bomb sites of the East End just after the war, and they've always said, we were hungry. We had holes in the roof. We had one bowl of cornflakes in the morning. We'd bunk into the Lido because we couldn't pay for the pool all day. We'd run around on an empty stomach, but we've got memories, and we were poorer than you'll ever be, but we were freer than you will ever be as well.
They were free, but they also understood their community.
Yes.
They understood reality when, and you said before, people walk around this country with their head down, looking depressed. It's because we don't know how to act anymore. We don't know what to say. We don't know what we can do. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, and all the things we thought were true can all change tomorrow. We've had that discussion about what is a woman and all those sort of people don't know what's true anymore. Hence why we're all becoming a nation of people who are depressed. Hence why it was easier and your life was better decades, 50 years ago, because you understood how reality worked in your neighborhood. Today, we don't.
It's also easier to get those depressed, atomized, lonely, and confused people hooked on government benefits and therefore create a dependent population easier to control. So it's almost like there's a perverse incentive for our managerial class to continue this decline.
I sort of agree. I don't think it's to control the people. I think it's basically short termism. These people are a problem. Pay them off because I only care about the next election 2 years from now. I'm not looking 20 years from now about how that's going to affect the economy. I'm looking at just being re-elected again in 2-3 years' time. It's all short-termism.
Sure, but there are some international institutions that have literally said we're going to confiscate your property by 2030. And they do get quite a lot of their policy ideas from there because they're midwits who don't come up with novel ideas themselves. So there are some actual true believers who would like a new neo-feudal system.
Of course,
where their power is as oligarchs is never challenged,
Yeah.
and the rest of us just accept the slop that we're given. And those people are fifth columnist traitors. But there you go. Anyway, so on to the next one. Speaking of fifth columnist traitors, Jeremy Hunt. Why are the Bank of England the only bank in the world who are simultaneously raising interest rates to rates akin to the 2008 financial collapse and also selling off bonds, which is a pretty risky strategy? So Jeremy Hunt said, Britain's stuck in a low growth trap. Oh, I wonder who put us there. After the official figures showed the nation faced a sustained period of high interest rates before the next general election. The Bank of England announced it was raising the base rate by 0.25 percentage points to 5.25%, the highest rate in more than 15 years and the 14th increase in a row. This means that people coming off fixed rate mortgages face an additional repayment of about £3,000 a year. You can see the chart here. Look at that. 5.25%. Just around the time of the 2008 financial crash. And that's where it was coming down. We're going back up to that. So we are in prime position to crash the pound. The bank expects inflation to average 4.9% over the fourth quarter of this year before falling to 3.1% next year and hitting the 2% target in 2025. Now, they did say that inflation numbers were performing better than expected yesterday. And then you found out that the CPI that they were using to calculate the numbers didn't have energy and food in it. So, those really essential things that people are spending most of their money on, they've just gone, yeah, we don't need to care about that. What about cigarettes and booze? It's like, no. Oh, okay, thank you for gaslighting us with statistics, but there you go. The bank said if there was evidence of more persistent inflationary pressures, then further tightening in monetary policy would be required. And also, it's just worth pointing out that our economy, because it's been stewarded into managed decline ever since the victory of the Second World War, that we are precariously reliant on the Chinese economy due to globalization and the American economy because of the global reserve currency they're currently in the middle of destroying. So if America and China have different strategies and they go belly up, then we're also screwed. So we have absolutely no energy security, no food security, and no financial security. We're currently demolishing our own economy, as are the two economies that we're reliant on. So it's just not looking good, is it? And so we go to the state of discourse because you said, okay, well, people just don't know the truth anymore. Well, at least we can speak freely and we can have our concerns addressed, right? Right. Yeah, doubt that. So this is a very well-written article in Telegraph. Quote, intellectual conformity is stultifying in Parliament and has been reinforced by the emergence of an all-powerful blob, the nexus of mandarins, policy advisors, quangocrats, and other government agents, a class of public servants who really don't like the public and are increasingly convinced that they have a constitutional duty to constrain and contain elected politicians. They are experts at delay, prevarication, and lawfare, and are cheered on by the left-wing activists who have taken over the legal profession, cultural institutions, academia, charities, and even many big companies. Thus, in the rare instances when the Tories attempt to think the unthinkable and respond to public opinion, as with the Channel crossings, the system does its best to block any change, empowered by quasi-constitutional legislation such as the Equality Act, the Climate Change Act, and our membership of the ECHR. Most of our institutions are now controlled by pseudo-meritocratic elites convinced that only it can prevent the masses from reverting to ignorance, racism, and prejudice. Our new ruling class is paternalistic, messianic. Even in a post-religious age, it has taken the role of priest and savior of the common people. It does truly feel like we are ruled by a class of people who are antagonistic, apathetic at best to the concerns of working people who can walk around every day and aren't encouraged by the graph that goes up because their actual quality of life and their sentimental feeling of alienation from the place they've inherited is getting worse. And these people just sort of don't care. But I know you're running to be mayor of Greater Manchester because you actually sincerely care. But honestly speaking, do you think any of the people that you're running against care? Or are they just in it for the job?
I've met lots of politicians, from councillors to MPs to prime ministers. Um, they're all very nice people, and I think they all go into it for the right reasons. What happens is it's become a career. So once you're in the system, it's easy to manipulate you. It's easy to start tempting you with what everyone else has been tempted with, and you become the thing you wanted to change. You become what you hated a decade or 2 decades ago. Before power corrupts, we know that, and I think it's very rare you get someone who can resist that temptation over a prolonged period of time. You get to a stage where all you're doing, and this is vast, nearly all politicians now, all you care about is the next election. Our biggest problem is no one's planning for the future. That's why we're in all this mess. You talked about the benefit system, more and more people on benefits, the insecurity around energy. All these things have been predicted. We're predicted every decade. No one does anything about it because of the next election coming round the corner. Why should I take the flak now? I won't be in power 20 years from now when these things manifest themselves as fantastic. I don't get the benefit of that. So you do get corrupted in the system. It takes somebody with a real backbone and someone who doesn't want to be a politician to be a politician.
See, the way that you're framing it, I do want to challenge it slightly because I see a lack of moral culpability in the idea that the system just sort of pushes you along and makes cowards out of people. And I think this is why I left the policy space right before I got into media and thankfully Lotus Eaters. And that is because I was brushing up against what I thought was incompetence repeatedly, and also brushing against people who were trying to make people write to spec and fit preordained ideas and make you compromise your values. But the directive was always top down. And it's because there was an agreed destination that we would capital P progress towards, whether we liked it or not. And we were just negotiating the speed and the color of car that we would take to get there. So actually, I do think that it's not short-termism. I do think there are very dedicated people that have an almost religious fervor to their commitment to a utopian vision that's been given a date, 2030 or 2050. And so I think they are the ones driving the ship and actually dragging lots of those careerist cowards along with them. So I don't think it's all incompetence from the top down. I sincerely think there are some people who have dark designs to immiserate us, and then there are too many cowards in the system that aren't standing up to that.
I'm sure there's people in the system who have got some, who suffer from the dark triads, who have got, are trying to plan something. What I've sort of understand is, if we look at the UK as a long-term project, so we judge the UK over 1,000-year history. We can't have governments that come in and flip things on a dime and change everything overnight, because every government every 4 or 5 years would do exactly that and would be chaos. There has to be some constraint of what governments can do over the short term. That rubs up against the will of the people who want change. Now, where that line is between that, I would imagine only the good leaders can discover. So it will never go as smoothly as you want it to go, because we're still trying to balance the long-term interest of the UK and the short-term interest of the politicians. How that works, I have no idea. But
See, my question would be, doesn't it just take political will? Because frankly, Tony Blair was passing hundreds of laws during his time in office. And now instead, the Conservatives, rather than tearing them asunder, have just been building atop them and working within the Blairite paradigm and framework. Expressly, David Cameron says that, Labour were way more diverse than us, so I decided I'm going to institute affirmative action. And preceding Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher said Tony Blair's the best part of our legacy. I genuinely think, despite the party, despite the system, there is a continuity of direction of travel here, and so they're all just dragging us along, and most of the arguments are just for show. I don't have a lot of faith in the system. Another person who doesn't as well, it's worth referencing on the website. And this is actually a free discussion that we decided to make available to everyone. I spoke to Professor Matthew Goodwin from the University of Kent about his book, Values, Voice and Virtue. There'll be future book clubs with the authors, interviews with those coming up soon. This is free on the website and it's also on YouTube. And if you pay us as little as £5 a month, you not only get access to all of our premium videos from behind the paywall, but you make it financially affordable to keep bringing in these guests as well, because obviously they've got travel costs and lighting costs and all the like to host them. But Matthew's idea is the new elite. And that is that there is a class of people that only care about their personal enrichment, the things that they can put on a CV or on LinkedIn, and they are the capital A anywhere men. They are universal in their culture. They're apathetic. They can be transplanted from time and place, parachuted from, say, Goldman Sachs in California to a safe seat constituency in Yorkshire, and suddenly, mysteriously, fail upwards and become prime minister. And it seriously does feel like there are forces behind the scenes that have said, we have a preordained set of people that we want to steward us to a preordained destination, and they just don't care because they gatekeep via a certain set of beliefs that is inculcated in a university system that has expanded its recruitment pool by making more and more people go to university under Tony Blair. They gatekeep people out of that club, and anyone who isn't in the club, well, why do we have to serve those plebs? We already know what we want to do with them, and that's make them dependent.
I think that's always happened. Hence why he calls it the new elite, because they've just replaced the old elite.
But there's always going to be an elite. It
Yeah.
just matters whether or not the elite actually care about you. But the feudal lords and the king cared far more about their subjects than the current oligarchs do in our facade of a democracy. And so I'm actually not against elitism. I just think you need an elite that actually care. But what would be great is if, rather than the status quo lawmaking system that we currently have now, where the Conservatives just build atop Blairism, if you had someone with the gumption of Tony Blair to come in and say, no, we're actually ripping that up and we're making much better laws that safeguard children in schools, that safeguard women's changing rooms and the like. But we can actually pass laws and we just burn the Equality Act. Absolutely jettison it. But there's no political will there.
At the moment,
Well,
but things are changing. That leader who will do that is on the way. We just don't know who they are yet, but that leader is on the way.
I'd love it if they could hurry up.
Yeah.
The current crop of leaders, though, and the reason they have utter contempt for us, this is, first of all, they've been expanding. They've just been voting themselves more money. So this came out the other day. The civil service has increased by more than 100,000 people in 7 years. And this has grown by 60%, the salary bill, to over 15 billion. These were figures released by the Cabinet Office, and they show that people employed in Whitehall departments who earn a six-figure sum has reached 2,050, an increase of 88% since 2016. Between 2016 and 2023, the number of elected officials employed by Whitehall departments grew by more than 100,000, which is greater than the entire regular forces of the British Army. So we have more people making useless laws to justify their permanent existence and their permanent pay rises, which outgrow all of the people doing actual useful jobs, than the people who are risking their lives defending the country. This is just a symptom of complacency and decline. And also, why aren't our priorities in order where we should have more noble fighting men on the front lines than people monitoring literally every behavior possible from the center of the city? And I think part of it is because we don't have that affirmative cultural narrative to actually inspire young men to conscript themselves in the army. That's why we've got the lowest reserve rate since the Napoleonic Wars. And
this is also because we've increased the size of the state. And if you increase the size of the state, it needs managing. You need more managers. You need more senior managers. You need more buildings. You need more cleaners. We keep increasing the size of the state. And the more you do, the more you need civil servants.
Yeah, and so you manufacture consent to keep hiring your friends,
Yes.
keep yourself pay rises, and it's a horrendous vicious circle. And so there was this great Substack article from The Upheaval, and he goes through a lot of comparisons. It's very long, so we're not going to read lots of it, and I encourage you to read it in your own time. He goes through comparisons between the ruling class in China and the governance structure in China and the US. And I think you can actually draw comparisons to the UK because the UK is basically a US vassal state at this point. And he describes the mentality of these people, the kind of thing that is cooked up in universities and in the civil service fast scheme and in Whitehall. And he says, there is an elite obsession with control. It's accelerated by belief in scientific management or the ability to understand, organize, and run all the complex systems of society like a machine through scientific principles and technologies. The expert knowledge of how to do so is considered the unique and proprietary possession of the elite vanguard. Ideologically, this elite is deeply materialist and openly hostile to organized religion, which inhibits and resists state control. So they want you to be lonely, atomized, purely material, and apathetic to your culture and heritage, because those are the safeguards against letting them take over. Managerial ideology is a relatively straightforward descendant of the Enlightenment liberal modernist project. It's a formula that consists of several core beliefs, what can be called core managerial values. These can be distilled into technocratic scientism, the belief that everything, including society and human nature, can and should be fully understood and controlled through scientific and technical means. Utopianism, the belief that a perfect society is possible, in this case, through the perfect application of perfect scientific and technical knowledge. Think net zero, for example. We can just engineer our way and also manipulate your behaviors in such a way that gets us to the perfect utopia of utter abundance, but also absolutely no environmental damage. It's self-negating, very arrogant, but it has that Promethean ambition of making heaven manifest on earth. History now takes on moral valence. To go backwards is immoral. Indeed, actively conserving the status quo itself is immoral. That's exactly what Tony Blair was talking about when he said, well, change is as inevitable as the change of the seasons. They are positioning themselves as the stewards on the right side of history to the place that they've already ordained is where we're going to. And if you kick up a fuss, well, you're just a speed bump on that road to history. We can ride right over your rights and your sentiments. Absolutely no concern. Meliorism, the belief that all the flaws and conflicts of human society, like cultural incompatibilities, and of human beings themselves are problems that can and should be directly ameliorated by sufficient managerial technique. Poverty, war, disease, criminality, ignorance, suffering, unhappiness, death, bigotry. None of the examples of the human condition that will always be with us, but are all just problems to be solved. They believe that people are fundamentally blank slate fungible tokens, and so if you strip away all of their cultural prejudices, then the perfect market actors to register on the GDP graph. Liberationism. Old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits must all be dismantled in order to ameliorate human problems. Hedonistic materialism, and this is a big one, and I think this is very prominent. I don't know how much time you've personally spent in the Westminster sphere, but most of the people that run Westminster have no family ties. They're very city living. They do the type of extracurriculars that would get them in trouble were they caught and they weren't in Westminster, and they didn't have that kind of political impunity for being prosecuted. And lots of them have no children, they're not married, or, and putting it frankly, there's a overrepresentation of gay men in politics because they're willing to trade sexual favors and they don't have that catalyst pressure to settle down and have a family in time, so they can just work all the time. And so these people that run the country are the exact kind of people who are incentivized to do short-term, very materialistic policies that just justify their own lifestyles. And it's the belief that human happiness and well-being fundamentally consists of and is achievable through the fulfillment of a sufficient number of material needs and psychological desires. So if you do net zero, for example, you can just hook yourself up to the brain chip machine, and guess what? If you've got absolutely no costs because all your energy is generated renewably, why not just sit in the metaverse all the time and have all of your pleasures fulfilled? Homogenizing cosmopolitan universalism. This is the belief that all human beings are fundamentally interchangeable and members of a single universal community. So a migrant is just as patriotic about Britain as you are. That's why he sends all his money back home. That the best systemic practices are discovered by scientific management and are universally applicable in all places and for all people at all times, and therefore the same optimal system should rationally prevail everywhere, and that progress will always naturally entail centralization and homogenization. And this is why when people like Peter Hitchens just say, Britain's lost, just leave. It's like, no, the point of global homogenization is that it's global and they will chase you to the ends of the earth. Everywhere is the same. Because if they're utopians, they cannot stand inequality or difference anywhere because it is a affront to their liberal sensibilities. So they won't ever leave you alone. So you can't just run. Even though the UK sucks right now, going to Australia and America for a brief bit of reprieve, for those honesty boxes, for those higher earnings, it's going to come there too eventually. They just need to bus the right amount of people that need to extract the right amount of money out and don't share the culture with the place. And then everywhere's going to be dilapidated too.
It's already happening in those places.
Yeah, it depends on the state, definitely. Yeah. But funny enough, when I went to Washington, I saw it's not. Washington, still pristine, still everything's functioning on time. The Ubers are running, the architecture's beautiful. And it's because that's the political capital. Yeah. That's the central hub where all of the Hunger Games type villains hang out. Yeah. Let all the plebs go and hunt their food and starve elsewhere. The last one, abstraction and dematerialization. The belief that more often the instinct, the abstract, and the virtual things are better than physical things. So, but you're walking around and you're seeing the decline. But have you seen this number on this graph that actually says that GDP is going up? Don't you feel consoled about your entire culture and heritage being stripped out from under your feet that you were never asked about? And this is why, just briefly wrapping up, this is why most people can't even tell if Rishi Sunak's left or right wing. Because it's a uniparty. They're all agreeing on the trajectory of travel.
Yep.
These arguments are just bread and circuses meant to obfuscate the actual issues. And so just wrapping back to conclude on a paragraph from Mary's article. She says, numerically speaking, the illegal migration bill that's meant to be stopping these boats, all the issues it addresses are sideshows. The number of migrants entering Britain by small boat, which was 45,000 last year, might seem high, but relative to 2022's overall net migration figure of 606,000, it's a small number, around 7.5%. These comparative figures explain why the small boats debate occasions so much sound and fury. It's a proxy for the growing perception that regardless of what the electorate wants, the political class has no interest in controlling migration of any kind, whether legal or otherwise. This is simply the consequence of Britain's structural reliance for both the economy and the welfare state is continued on economic growth. In practice, in a low productivity economy such as Britain's, this means population growth. And since Britain's native population has been below replacement for decades, mainly because it's very expensive to have a house and family, leaders must either level with the electorate about the need to trim our sails or else grow the economy, the population, by any other means. And so I wanted to conclude, Britain's not mid, but the managerial mindset is what is destroying it. Britain is not unremarkable. She's just being mistreated. I think we can fix her.
Thanks for watching that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to support the work we do here, you can subscribe to our website for as little as £5 per month to get access to all the premium work that we have on there, including the most recent episode of Bo's history series Epochs, which is episode 119, where he's talking about the fall of Rome. If you'd like to catch up with what Bo is doing, you can follow him on Twitter at HistoryBro1. Thanks again for watching, and goodbye.